and welcome to R&R's Ask the Expert. I'm Kayla McGowan, editor-in-chief, and today I have a very special guest for y'all. He's a great personal friend of mine and an industry expert. And if you haven't guessed it, it's Todd Sangid, and he is talking about the survey that DocuSketch recently put out on the trust consumers have with the claims process. He is the enterprise solutions consultant with DocuSketch, and he is a Tennessee boy through and through. So, without further ado, please welcome Todd.
Thanks for having me, Kayla. I don't know how through and through Tennessee boy. I'm pretty city, but I am from Tennessee, born and raised. Born and raised.
And the accent is there, and you're a Tennessee sports fan. I mean, come on, Tennessee through and through. Let's be real
That's
here.
true. That's true. And I go around the country meeting people all the time. And they're all like, I've been to Nashville. And I'm like, that's not Tennessee. That is not Tennessee. You got to go somewhere outside of Nashville to experience Tennessee.
That's
So,
part
like
of
you would say,
Tennessee.
right? You
Yes,
know, you
exactly.
say you wouldn't say I've been to Nevada, and then you're like, well, I live in Las Vegas, but Las Vegas is different than the rest of Nevada, right? So very similar.
100%. 100%. So I mentioned we're talking about the survey, but a little bit about yourself. I think you have a unique background. You've played quite a few roles in the industry. So if you don't mind, before we dive into the nitty-gritty, who are you and what do you do for our industry and how did you end up here?
Yeah, no. I have been in and out of the industry, whether I realized it or not, for the past 15 years. I started as a custom home builder and worked my way into the insurance way. I actually had three territories of and captive agency. So I understand that process, and I was able to see how the claims process took place and dealt with customers on the front lines being an agent and then moved to become a estimator on the restoration side because I understood the construction sequence and how that process worked. And I also understood the claims process, which I felt would be viable in helping customers because so many people really just don't understand the process. And then worked into an operational role and then found my way at DocuSketch and haven't looked back. It's been awesome, able to travel the country, take care people, help them do some implementation with our service, along with giving some ideas and getting a lot of ideas and understanding how the restoration landscape is, not only in the Southeast, but all across, all the way in the West. And the one thing that I've learned is every operation, especially on the restoration side, does operate a little bit differently, but they all have the same common goal, right? They want to restore people's homes and their lives. So that's why this survey is it's pretty interesting, right? Being able to see where the trust is, especially from the claims process, because you hear it all the time. People have been like, I've been with this company for X amount of years and I've never had to file a claim, so I know they'll take care of me. And so and I know we'll dive into all that, but that's a little bit about my background and how I got here.
Yeah, and I would say every time we see each other, we are always talking about taking care of the customer and the role that DocuSketch plays, and not only taking care of the customer, but bridging the gaps with all of the parties involved, and obviously taking care of the consumer is the number one goal of all parties involved. And so, I think that's kind of what prompted this call based on the survey that you guys recently put out. So just going right in, what inspired DocuSketch to conduct this survey with those we serve, and their understanding of the insurance process, and maybe share a point or two of what surprised you the most.
Yeah, no, and I think it's the reason that DocuSketch we really wanted to put this on is to really get a better understanding of the landscape because you hear it all the time that there is a lot of distrust or lack of continuity in the claims process, right? From the homeowner to filing the claim to dealing with their agent and then their adjuster, and the carrier and then the contractor. And we really wanted to understand, where is the mindset of it? With social media playing such a pivotal role, especially in the past 10 to 20 years, a lot of people have lost that relationship piece that back in the day you had with your agent, right? They were your go-to for anything to do with anything that was to go wrong, right? Your auto, your home, and you were bundling them together, and you trust them to take care of you because they were the expert, right? They were the subject matter expert in the field, and you trusted them, right? And you trusted them to take care of you and to put you in the right policy. And based on this survey, what we're learning is with the ability to click a few buttons online and get your insurance based on premium dollars as opposed to policy, it's really leading to that lack of trust. And it's really starting at the very front, and then it leads into the claims process. And so it really helped us understand and gain a broader picture. Instead of just hearing the words, we wanted some data behind it. Now we have it, and now we can try and help provide any solutions possible.
Well, it provides a benchmark too, right? Not just for DocuSketch, but in the industry as a whole. And if we're able to share this data with consumers, fellow industry professionals, and even the carrier, it helps
Yeah.
us build our relationships, but also take care of the customers better than we probably are now. And that's just simply by putting out a survey to understand where the gaps are, maybe the mistrust is. And so it allows us as the professional to say, hey, this is what is maybe not so much understood, or maybe, you know, a bigger issue to the consumer, and here's how we can help. So I think it serves as a multi-tool, if you will, and it was much needed because we didn't really have the data on this, right? It was kind of a shot in the dark. He said, she said, what do we see? What does our consumer say when we're there? What does the carrier say? So I think this kind of brought it all together to make it a collaborative piece for all parties involved, right?
Absolutely. And and being on the front lines for a period of time and working with business developments, a lot of times you're wanting to build that relationship as the contractor with the agent, right? To get in with their policyholders and things of that nature. And a lot of times the way to bridge that gap is to utilize the DocuSketch service, take it to the agent's office, let it see the capabilities that it offers and the ability to determine what it looked like pre-loss condition and just show that documentation is key, right? When I go around the country, I always ask, these restorers, what do they get paid to do? And a lot of times they're like serve customers, mitigate, drive people's homes, restore their lives. And really they do that because they have a good heart. They have a servant heart. They have a servant nature. They have a good core. That's why they're in the industry. But a lot of the times and the number one thing, it's all about documentation. And if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. And that's what, that's where the gap is bridged, so to speak, with the tool, as in DocuSketch and other tools out there, right? It's just more about consistency and communication and being able to serve the customers better because in the end game, what this survey really tells us, and the things that we hear on the ground, is there's only one person that suffers in all of this, and it's always the policyholder, right? And if we can do our part and helping, like you stated, bridge that gap and provide a clear picture for them, then I feel like we're doing our part to better the industry.
I 100% agree with all of that, right? We all play a part. And if we can play our part just right, everything else falls into place. And then relationships are built, and the process itself just naturally speeds up, not just with the tools that we have, but the communication and collaboration that we create, right? And so I think what this survey did is highlight a lot of gaps, kind of what we just briefly said. But how does DocuSketch help bridge those gaps, and what does that look like for you guys? And how you not only help the contractor, but help everybody involved?
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. And I would venture to say, what it does help bridge a gap, but what it does is it increases what we would call as cycle times, right? By utilizing it effectively. And that's our terminology for it, right? But what that really does is it increases or it limits the time that homeowner is out of their home or out of that area, right? You're able to speed up the claims process, which, their lives have been interrupted. And our job is to get them back restored as quickly as possible, right? But we also want to get paid for it as well. And so that's where the documentation piece comes in, and that's where that gap is taken care of with DocuSketch, and utilizing that function or that tool in order to get that homeowner back into their home quicker. And it also establishes a line of trust. There's no more the question of, well, that wasn't there, that wasn't done, or we had this here, right? You're able to clearly capture it, and it paints a visual tool that everybody can see, and it's extremely transparent. And there's not a lot of that, the questioning and the distrust. It is very transparent. It is there for everybody to see, and that is what I would say in that aspect.
And I would definitely say to your point, everybody sees the same thing. It just takes a conversation to maybe put things into actual perspective or picture, right? Because you and I can look at a room, let's say, and you're going to see things differently than I do. And it's going to take us to have a conversation to make sure that we're seeing things the same. And this is no different in the claims process, right? And even for the
100%.
consumer, this allows the consumer to see what's going on, how it happened, right? This is where you were before, and this is where you are now, and this is what it took for us to get here. And I think that it's understandable and easy for people to, ask questions. It's a picture, right?
Yeah.
It's a room filled with things, but what questions can you ask? Well, the questions are easy to be asked if you're all looking at the same thing and then have a conversation, right? At that point, we're just merely being human and, calling out what we see and asking things that we may not understand, right? And so I think for what you guys implement here is just a bigger picture, if you will, right? It tells a bigger story. You guys have timestamps and there's ways to add notes and just all of these things, right? And so I think you guys are playing a part by putting a couple pieces together in one platform that's usable by all parties involved, which I think is huge. I've personally used it. I'm not a contractor. I've been able to see what it does. And I think that I'm a consumer too. You're a consumer. And we've all faced our own losses. And I look back and I'm like, wow, if I would have had this when I had my water loss, this would have made
Oh,
a world of
yes.
difference. Right. Mine happened
Absolutely.
during COVID. I used my cell phone to take pictures. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the heck I was taking pictures of, man. I've been in this industry, but all I know is they said, take pictures of the damage. Got it. Thank God for my contractor, right? They took better
Yeah.
photos than I did. But that was the reality. And sometimes that is the reality, right? We tell
Hmm.
homeowners to document, but that's where DocuSketch comes in and they can help educate not just the homeowner, but the carrier and even a contractor a time or two in the field. I know you guys do a lot of training. So it's key to understand you guys don't just offer a tool, right? You offer so much more than that. And that's kind of why I was so interested in talking about this survey because this survey helps us take our industry to the next level and build the relationships that we need to build. So, with that being said, it's interesting that nearly half of our population express some distrust with the carrier, and I think it's just lack of understanding, if you will, on the consumer side. Right to your point, you earlier said, hey, we're doing everything digital. We're not really asking questions. We're like, hey, if my deductible's higher, do I get to save more money? Well, what does that do to us as a consumer? And I think that's where the distrust or misunderstanding lies. So, do you think, or how do you think, the carrier and us as contractors can help restore confidence and help people utilize technology to make that distrust go the other way and turn into trust?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. Great question and how it was posed. And what I would say is this is right. It starts at the very front because as a former agent and a consumer, and I've got a few stories that just has happened recently and transpired. It all starts at the very front, right? And most people, myself included, we shop for price, not necessarily coverage. But if we do a little bit more digging and educate ourselves as homeowners, policyholders, and as agents, if we just do a little bit more job of asking some more prying, leading indicator questions and dive into the policy a little bit better, that would really help with the trust aspect. I can give you, like I was just mentioning, a prime example of my own. I just had a accident that I told you about on Sunday, Father's Day, where we was coming home and I hit a deer. Well, the deer hit me, but hit the deer. And the fun fact is, it was in my wife's vehicle, and she has a separate policy under a separate carrier than I do. And I had, and that's all because of price, right? I had not moved her to my policy yet because of price. However, I knew my broker. I know him very well. I knew I could have picked up the phone at 10 o'clock at night and called them. I did not know her. She had got it online, right? And this is on me for not doing the due diligence on the back end, right? You look at that number, your homeowners goes to escrow, right? The rest of it's tied here. And then so because we're so busy in our daily lives, right? Sometimes those aspects miss. But in this instance, right, and I understand the claims process very well. A lot of people, I would say roughly about 80 to 90% of citizens do not understand the claims process, right? And so even me, I'm questioning the process as it's taking place. I'm making sure everything's documented. I'm calling 911 and getting a report, even though you don't need a report for a deer hit. I knew that, but I want it documented. right? I wanted documented because I didn't understand her policy. I had never seen her policy. I utilize my own AAA insurance, things of that nature, to get the tow. These are things that we are so busy and we don't slow down enough to do the due diligence on the front end. Everybody, not just homeowners, but agents, sometimes, and myself, and I can only talk about myself because I'm more focused on the sale as opposed to the education process of it. And that's where we can do a better job. Because again, there are silos, right? You've got the agent process and then you got the claims process, right, in the insurance world. And a lot of times they don't speak. So being able to best set that customer up and that customer to also do their due diligence on the front end, right, to understand how their policy reads, right? So and that was on me, and that's something I'm living with right now. Just got off the phone not too long ago with the adjuster, right? He had to do a virtual assessment, and I wanted to use this body shop, but it wasn't part of their program. And it's those things that I know that homeowners go through on the claims process every single day. And it's frustrating, right? It's hard. We have four children and now she's having to drive a little bitty vehicle because of the renter's coverage, because we didn't have the right dollar amount for per use per day. And it's just those little things. And it happens on the claims process and the homeowner's claim process. Same thing with loss of use and ALE. And you just don't spend enough time documenting that before a disaster happens, right? And that's where DocuSketch can bridge that gap, right? If we were able to get on the front end and to, partner up or however it works, or any type of documentation tool, right, with the agents, and to be able to help capture that information prior to any type of loss taking place, that really helps along with the education. Because knowledge is power, right? And the more knowledge you have, especially on something that you are paying money monthly for, even in my own seat, it can help, especially when disaster strikes. So that would be my answer to that.
And I would definitely say you don't know what you have until you need it is kind of where we all go,
Yeah,
right? Because we're like,
all
we're
day, every
basing
day.
everything off of a dollar, right? And that's all
Mhm.
consumers, not just now, but it was like that years ago too. And it's going to stay that way more than likely until we start spreading the education and knowledge to those who need it
Yeah,
most. And, we're getting there. I definitely say we're getting better at it, but surveys like this allow us to sit back and talk about these things like, hey, where are the gaps, right? For you, it's a personal instance, right? For me, thankfully, I had the right coverage. I just had to, play a little and let them know that I was in the
right.
space. And so I think, every situation is a little different. We have to remember workload plays into this as well. The game of phone tag happens through these processes, right? Like you
Absolutely.
just said, you were just on a call. And so this is no different. The communication plays into this, education plays into
Mhm.
this, and then of course your policy as a whole plays into this. So interestingly enough, the younger generation, not surprised by this, have a higher suspicion of maybe distrust and, if you will, I hate to throw this word around, but fraud. But that's the younger generation, if I'm being quite honest. How can clear communication and documentation, reduce these concerns, but also help with transparency and just a better understanding for those who may be on the fence about things?
Yeah, no, and it's a great point. Clear communication really establishes a line of trust, is what it does. Is because if you are clearly communicating and that relationship is getting built, there's not as much miscommunication, right? And there's not as much inconsistency within that claims process. I was talking earlier about across the country, all restorers sort of have different processes. So do all carriers, right? So do all carriers, right? I loved helping people as an agent. Like all these agents are doing their best to take care of their customers, right? And as a consumer, a lot of times it boils down to price, right? However, if we are clearly communicating and consistently communicating and building those relationships, that trust is garnered, then you're getting in the right policy a lot of the time. So when disaster does strike, right, you know the right people to call, you know what your coverage is, and then you hire a restoration professional to take you through that process. You understand what you have, and the next steps are really you already understand that. It does take a little bit of time and a little bit of digging to understand that process. And experience going through it like that. I've went through three claims in my lifetime. Two of them vehicle, one of them homeowners. All of them were different. Every single one of them were different, and a couple of them were through the same carrier, right? A lot of times on the claims process, right? The homeowner will reach out and they'll file a claim, then it'll go to a claims adjuster, and it could be a desk adjuster. Well, then a property field adjuster gets involved, right? And you've got all these people. Another example I have just recently, a family member, had a homeowner's dwelling policy and he had a claim to his dwelling, right? Then he had a secondary claim with a separate carrier at a separate property. And we were actually talking about it last night, and he was like, they've just been handled so differently, right? Like one of them, they all happened at the same time. It was the same storm. One of them's already paid and settled and ready to be rebuilt. The other one, I've had to talk to seven different people. And that's where that mistrust comes in, right? If it keeps getting passed around. And that's where as contractors, we can do a really good job of streamlining that for homeowners. But as consumers, they can also do a better job and be more diligent on understanding the process a little bit more on the front end. Um, and again, out of sight, out of mind, as you said earlier, right? A lot of times you react as opposed to respond, and so that is something, and that is something that definitely this survey told us. Something we thought, right? Something I talk about all the time, but putting numbers and data behind it really tells you the younger generation is just clicking buttons, getting online, finding the cheapest, and going with that, as opposed to asking around, figuring out somebody that knows somebody, and going into their office. Like going into an agent's office and sitting down and going over that is great. That is great, not only for you getting taken care of, right? But it's good for the agent, it's good for the policyholder, just to understand, right? Because it is a lot of numbers and there's a lot of verbiage in there that is tough to understand and comprehend. So that would be something that I would say, to be able to bridge this, because it is a click of the button away, or getting on an app and just saying,
Mhm.
huh, let me compare these against this. What could this do? And not being able to get into really the fine print per se until it's too late. And so that is definitely something that this survey has showed us.
Yeah, and I would say just to your point, like the instant gratification world that we live in right
Oh,
now is right
yes,
up the younger generation's alley because that's all they've ever known, right? Um,
right,
I think you and I, we sit in a unique spot because we come from a spot where we didn't have that instant gratification and now we have it. So we kind of see both sides, if you will, but also we also see why these things happen where people don't really understand their coverage or they're saving the dollars because they use, a tool online that compares all these different, policies, but maybe it's the same, but they pay less, right? So we're relying on
correct.
technology, right? The younger generation is, and you know, I can definitely speak for myself. I've done a lot of talking on the phone when we were going through coverage personally, but I've never been in an office. And I think that also is part of the problem because there's a lot of distractions, right? You're on the phone, you're on your computer messing around, whether you're working or personal, and you're really not paying attention. So I think that there's a lot of um, obstacles, if you will. And if we just took the time to take those obstacles away, we would save ourselves in the long run. I think a lot of time people are trying to save money up front. And then when it comes to the problem, then they end up coming out of pocket and they don't really understand why they're coming out of pocket.
Absolutely.
So I think if we take the time to educate, answer questions, it'll make a world of difference for the consumer's side of things, right? And that will also help us as contractors and the carrier because, I think if we look at things, right, it's like when you buy a home, you pay for a down payment, you have coverage, you have all these things,
Mhm.
and it's a long game. Insurance policies are there to help you too for a long game as well, if you want to put it into a better perspective, right?
Mhm.
You guys are betting against each other, if you will. Like something's going to happen, something's not going to happen, right? But have the coverage when something does happen, because, it's not if, it's when something happens, whether it's your home or your car. And so I think that's kind of where we as professionals need to help educate not just the consumer, but also let the carrier and even fellow contractors know, like, hey, these are where the gaps are. And now we have the data, right?
Absolutely. No, you're 100% right. And you couldn't have said it any more elegantly. Because the reality of it is there's no consistency across the board. But on the insurance side and the contractor side, a lot of times they got into this business for the same reason. They like taking care of people.
Mhm.
And there are a ton of great agencies and brokerages out there that are just they take care of people and they want to and they explain the process. Same on the contractor side. And what I want to make a point to is at some point we have to slow down in order to speed up and to get better. And I even find myself sometimes getting to Saturday and being like, what in the world did I do all week? Right? What in the world happened? Because we find ourselves just going so fast, right? Like I haven't dug into the policies that I have that my wife has, which is just this one, because I haven't slowed down long enough to dig into it. The same can be said for a lot of things. But the numbers are not lying to us here, right? They're telling a story within itself, and it's very very clear that, and we all know this in the industry that there is a large mistrust, and we can do a better job as contractors and agents and working together a lot of the time, right? And working together, and that comes with understanding how each side operates, and taking care of the customer, number one, because in my heart, I believe that agents, claims processes, and adjusters, they want to take care of the customers. That's their number one goal. The same with restoration contractors, right? And there's still a lot of good relationships out there. But if you talk to any contractor that's been in it for a while, they talk about, the good old days where they had really good relationships with the adjusters. And the same can be said for agents. They talk about loving having that person to refer to know their policyholder is taken care of. And I feel like that has been, you know, taken away a little bit with the social media age, right? With the ability to have a click of the button and just click the lowest price and it come in and things of that nature. So, you know, having the data is great. The next step is what can we do about it, right? And how can we bridge the gap, so to speak? And I think talking about it, number one, is always key, and that's why I really appreciate you having me on for it because it is a struggle within this industry, and it's a struggle. There's a lot of different industries that struggle with it, healthcare and others, but being able to have it on the forefront and just work towards a common solution is and having tools like DocuSketch to be effective to help do that is key and pivotal.
Yeah, and I would definitely say to your point, we all care about the consumer, right? We are consumers as well. So the quality of love
Hmm.
and care that we have is just on a different level, and we're in the industry to serve. So are the carriers. And so it's just, again, we've said this a ton, bridging the gap. It's just like, how can we utilize things like this survey to help us come together and make that experience for the consumer better? Because at the end of the day, if we're not on the same page, they suffer. Whether it's
Yeah.
the time it takes to process their claim or get them back in their home, they ultimately are the ones that are, affected the most, whether it be good or bad. And so, I think there were some things that the survey did uncover as well, which were some topics that are more urgent than others. And based on the survey and what you guys found, how can we help improve customer education and engagement on both sides, not just the carrier or on the contractor side, but what can we do? What are you guys seeing as the most urgent topics or opportunities for us to capitalize on to help bridge that gap?
Well, it's a great question, and I'll say that I've seen across the country there are some companies that actually hold like meetings, right, where they will speak in there and then they'll have insurance companies come in on the agent level, not necessarily the claims level, but the agent level. And they will have, people from all around that aren't just their policyholders, and they will come and they will attend, right? Just to gain additional knowledge and to understand how they work together within that landscape. That is an avenue I have seen prove very effective, dealing within the Chamber of Commerce locally, right? Getting involved as a restoration professional, that those relationships are key. And there's a lot of insurance professionals, right? And the BNIs, and just forging those common relationships for the betterment of the policyholder, I think goes a long way. And then adding a key piece of documentation into it, it does prove vital.
And I will definitely say to your point, like bringing in the agent helps at the front end, right? So people can ask the burning questions, or maybe even the contractor and the agent can kind of see where they're seeing the gaps when it does come
Hmm.
time to utilize your policy. And I think, we talk about this, but for those listening, it's as simple as them reaching out to their local carrier and asking them if they'd like to put on a workshop that's maybe free for the consumer, maybe once a month or something like that. It's really that simple, if I'm being quite honest, to just take a second, build that rapport and that relationship, but also educate the consumer. So when you're coming in on both sides and helping them in a time of crisis, which is usually what it is, they're
Yes.
more calm, cool, and collective because the trust is with the contractor and the carrier. So, I think you guys have the data. And with you guys and your collaborative efforts, I know you guys are going to say the same thing to your guys as customers. Like it could be just as simple as that. And really, we just need to do it. And, nobody's going to do it for us. And I think, if you guys have a chance, you should look at the survey. I'm going to put a link in the body of this so you guys can access it and maybe ask Todd and the team some questions about maybe how you can leverage the data for yourself and how you can help the customers you serve in your community. I don't have any more questions. I think we covered a ton. You did a great job. You provided some great insights. Do you have any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, I identified that this had been an issue for a long time. I'm really thankful that we were able to get this out there. And everybody that's been in this industry understands what a struggle it is, especially because when a claim is filed, sometimes, especially on the homeowner side, it can be the worst day of their lives, right? And they're in a distraught state of mind. And so being able to work together and find a way and get data behind it is key to bettering the industry as a whole. And so I really appreciate you having me on, and that's all I have.
Of course, I'd love to check in and see where we are, maybe towards the end of the year and see if we've implemented some things or maybe, seen some change because I think it's really important. This industry is ever evolving. And it's nice to have these check-ins because we can see what people took and applied. And maybe if there is an end of year survey or next year, we can come back and we can talk about, hey, what have we implemented to help the consumers and our industries as a whole? I think it's always great. You guys are always collecting data, so I can count on something from you guys and some topics to talk about to help us, elevate our industry as a whole, right? Elevate the consumer experience, but also most importantly, bridge the gap and build relationships. So with that being said, thank you so much, Todd. I appreciate your time today. And for all of you listening, we will see you on the next episode of Ask the Expert. Take care.